Welcome. We are so glad to have you join us today. We are Jim and Geraldine Bogier, and we are Legacy C3. We love to help people grow to their very best, to assist others to become more. And today we're going to focus on reducing that fear and having some of those, finding some skills to get rid of some of the fear that might be hindering us from actually moving forward. We are a company that coaches, trains, and speaks on leadership and team relationships. So if you have a leader, you have a team, we can help you work better together. Our tagline is actually productive cultures
built,
thank you, on communication and trust. And how are you going to have trust and communication in a team if you have fear that is hindering you and stopping you from moving forward? So we're going to talk about how to improve your life by realizing and releasing those fears. We're really excited to do this one for you.
Yes, I'm a little anxious. Well, and there's a point, right? When we present, a lot of us, that's the greatest fear is public speaking. Now that's not for us, but there is a point of adrenaline. There's a point of anxiousness when I competed in sports or when you did acting or drama, whatever it might be. There's a performance anxiety. So I joke, but yet there's still that healthy sense of anxiety or adrenaline rush, the butterflies in the stomach, so to speak. So fear is good, and it is designed by God for us to be effective and to help us in those times and situations when it's much needed. But we've allowed fear to overtake. And we just want to say that you're not alone. We're going to talk today really about each one of us, no matter what responsibility role you take. Anxiety and fear really can paralyze us in so many ways. And so let's talk a little bit about this idea of anxiety versus fear. First of all, over 40 million people, according to the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, deal with some suffering of anxiety-related disorders in the US alone. That's over 18%. Now, we've just experienced COVID. One in every two, it says, one out of every two people, adults, children, whatever, 50% are dealing with some level of anxiety. So we're all dealing with this, and we all deal with it in different forms and fashions at some point in our life. So fear as a concept might seem like a similar sensation to the idea of anxiety, excuse me, but it's generally considered to use or to be, the anxiety is defined as those discomfort. It's kind of that dis-ease or uneasiness that relates to so many areas of our life that we begin to worry about them, as opposed to fear is kind of that initial, I'm in a scary place. There's something happening. I might be on the edge of something and afraid of falling off, or be in a situation that I'm really scared. And that's more the fear when we talk about the difference between anxiety and fear. Anxiety really is oftentimes less noticeable, but it begins to be that ongoing kind of sensation, that recurring and almost debilitating kind of way in which it interferes with our life.
Right.
The impact both fear and anxiety can have on all of us in all areas of our life is huge. It's not until we begin to recognize and reflect on our own lives that we can begin to realize how anxiety is a compilation of fears that we're unable to acknowledge and effectively express themselves when they arise. There's so many different articles that we'll be showing and sharing during this time, but there's one on that idea of anxiety versus fear. And you can check out that article through Psychology Today. Talks about that specific issue.
So what happens to your body when you're afraid? What is actually going on physiologically? So let's talk about what fear is causing in you, in your chemical makeup. Now, commonly observed sensation of fear occurs in response to an external stimulus and causes the amygdala in the brain to release a hormone called cortisol. I'm going to nerd
Geek
out on
geek
you.
out a little bit.
Cortisol is also known as the flight or fight hormone. And it's what causes our bodies to respond unconsciously and elicit anticipation of danger or attack from an external source. From the amygdala, cortisol then travels to every muscle in the body and causes them to activate and to tense up in fear. That's the response, and it's an unconscious response that our physical body does to protect us from attack, which is really cool that that happens,
It is.
actually, you know?
It is.
Physically, cortisol increases the release of glucose to the bloodstream, primarily as a way to increase your energy level, give you that sugar rush you need to take off and run. It's an immediate response to that dangerous stimulant. The trouble with this in today's age is that not every stimulus presents a real danger. We don't have crazy wild animals chasing after us all the time, meaning that the glucose, which gets sent into the bloodstream, remains unused and over time can start to build up. Now, this is why stress and anxiety and unprocessed fears can actually be the root of many physiological issues such as diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and other things. Another function of cortisol is to assist the body to regain homeostasis after a period of stress, fear, or an imbalanced release of hormones.
You got all that? I know we're familiar with that, but I thought that was great just to explain it from the physiological and the biological standpoint on that. The problem with fight or flight, though, today is as the kind of the fear and the fight or flight opportunity that's created in us has evolved, so have the fears.
True.
And you just mentioned that we don't have the dangerous situations where we're out in the woods somewhere, or our ancestors who had to deal with those physical dangers on a regular basis. Now they've become dreadful work meetings. Cortisol is still released in that. Maybe it's for you the worst case scenario of taking public transit. And growing up in a small town in a small city, I remember one of the first times I jumped on a subway, and a big jumped. Use that term carefully and probably not correctly, but got on a subway. There was anxiousness. There was fear. Well, I wasn't fear. I guess I could have been fearful for my life, but just not knowing where to go and what happens. So just to understand that the fight or flight doesn't necessarily correlate the same as it did years ago, because we're maybe just dealing with spending time with family, and we become anxious about that, and it's a trouble. We feel like every time we show up, there's going to be some criticism about us. Our bodies still respond to these situations in the same ways, using excess amounts of energy as we enter into this protective mode. So it becomes that fight or flight protective mode, and causes us to burn more energy, to cause more stress, to cause more of that anxiety. The human body hasn't yet learned to differentiate between the dangers of, say, getting hit by a car or failing an exam. Now, there's still problems with both of those, but it is a little bit different. But both things still elicit the same physiological response, the same response in the brain, and how we become overstimulated and flooded with unnecessary hormones. The result, unnecessary and unhelpful levels of stress. So what do we learn with this? Well, first of all, let's forgive our bodies. We talk about giving grace and compassion. We need to start with ourselves a lot of times. So forgive our bodies for its evolutionary assumptions. We're thankful for it, and we're thankful for how it works, but be aware of that. It's not our fault that these responses have become routine. The reality behind our fear responses is that we must train our minds to react differently. So how do we react? This is the beginning of letting go of fears, learning to react and respond appropriately to grasp that. So to learn more about stress response, you can read more in one of the articles that we have as we go forward.
So if we follow these guidelines of reflection and acknowledge the truth of our fears, noticing them for what they really are, we can begin to differentiate between rational fears versus those which are not. Usually there'll be some sign letting you know if your reactions are exaggerated or not. And so it's essential to remain aware of your surroundings for this reason. Be conscious of your interactions with others during a period of so-called fear. Are you creating tension where tension isn't called for? Have you created rifts or noticed a shift in the positive energy of the interactions you used to take for granted?
Mm.
Get curious about your fears. And if you feel comfortable to do so, ask those closest to you to help you identify common patterns that you're falling into. Often it's other people who notice our patterns first.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're really struggling to do so, difficult as it might sound, it can help to talk to someone about it.
And Gerald, you made a great point there. Let's take a hold of those thoughts and figure out what that's coming
Mhm.
from. And then it helps us to process so much better. So, is it within our power to change? Yes, it is. But oftentimes, the problem with that question becomes um, it comes up during our power struggle between maintaining and releasing control of fear. How do we balance that? How do we make sure that we're doing it in the right way? Our own capacity to change is infinite, and it's vital that we access these potential opportunities if we are truly to start thriving. But how do we begin to change? Let's think of some questions. I'm going to read some questions here and see if they sound familiar in the way of which they've kind of wormed into your everyday dialogue, maybe your thought process, maybe your narrative or your story. Listen to these statements. I'm not capable. I'd love to, but I couldn't or I can't. That's just really not for someone like me. I'm not able. If any of these sound familiar, we need, and hearing ourselves say that, we may need to change again our mindset. How do we relate to those statements? How do we address those statements? What do we do with those statements so that we begin to think differently, so that we act and respond differently?
Mhm. The most important thing to consider when you're seeking to let go of fear is to fully acknowledge it for what it is and how it is formulated in your mind. Only by familiarizing yourself with the fear can you hope to overcome it.
Hmm.
So here's some 5 steps that might help you in releasing fear. Step 1, acknowledge the fear. Sometimes we fail to even look at it and acknowledge that we are afraid. Step 2, release the control surrounding it. That's the letting go part. Step 3, decide which action can be taken to overcome it. That's the key. You're wanting to overcome this fear. Step 4, take this action to make lasting change. Take some intentionality there.
Mm-hmm.
And step 5, put all effort, energy, and concern into creating and maintaining that change. Simply writing this down and taking an objective look at the role fear has been playing in your life is the most effective and lasting way to make changes in how you perceive and deal with fear.
I'm, pardon me. We mentioned you're not alone in this. We are in this together, but so many of us, we heard the stats earlier, are dealing with this. In fact, this is one of our most popular for people to sign up and sign up immediately when it first came out. So we're all dealing with these things.
Mhm.
How do we address them? And Geraldine gave some great tips. Go back and play it back if you missed it. Write those down and then begin to work through the process. Reflection. Reflection is one of those ways in which we can really begin to process in a right frame of mind. So, what does reflection look like? Well, it may involve some meditating, it involves some silence. Maybe it's for you, it's creating those or writing down those quotes that you meditate on. For us, of people of faith, Bible verses or scripture have been wonderful for us to think about and reflect on. Affirmations that I've written down to continue to remind myself, this is who I am. This is what I'm striving to become. This is how I'm becoming or playing into my strengths. These may be some of my challenges that I'm trying to overcome, but I'm remembering, I'm meditating on, I'm reading those affirmations or those positive thoughts. So those quiet times, reflection really involves silence. Maybe it's journaling to write some of those thoughts down that you have.
Mm.
Breathing is another key element
Yes.
of that whole idea of reflection. And again, trying to take control of your body in reflecting, in meditating, in learning to breathe properly. Be aware of our physiological effects and begin to control these. Begin to think of how your body is reacting and responding, and what can you do to continue to calm yourself, to be more effective in handling and dealing with this anxiety and the fear. Maybe you just need to relax your tense shoulders.
That's me.
Physically, we talked about breathing. There's studies shown on how it releases stress by doing a certain amount of seconds breathing in and then a slow breath out. And you might have to do that a couple times, but it really begins to relax us and helps us. This is a great time to work through how to overcome fear and allow yourself to reflect on, why are you feeling this way? I wrote down some questions that help me in thinking through this when we're trying to overcome fear. How impactful will this be to me, really? What are the losses or challenges that I'm facing if it happens? Maybe how bad will this be? Or think of the worst case scenario. We oftentimes, when we rationally process, we realize it's not that bad, even if it ever happens. So much of our anxiety leads to worry, which it's a high percentage, we never deal with it, but we play out the scenario in our brain, but work through that and think, well, that's really not that bad. What happens if this happens? Well, I can deal with that, but I've got a grasp of it. So what is the cause of the fear? What is the real reason I'm feeling this way? What are some things I can begin to be grateful for? We're going to talk about gratitude as one of those, but in this reflecting process, those are just some questions, just some things to think about that helps us to really begin to realize the mental benefits of the reflection. Not just that it's a good discipline to get into, but how it can even affect us physically as well as emotionally and mentally. So a couple things this practice of reflection does for us. One, it calms us. It puts us in a better mental health. Secondly, it confronts those thoughts and helps us to take really those thoughts captive so they don't derail us, so that we don't keep going down a trail that we don't need to go, but we begin to process and grab a hold of those and take captive those thoughts and deal with them effectively. We need to commit to not allowing these to become all-consuming in our minds, not allow them to consume our very nature, everything about us, because that's where the fear and the anxiety really kicks into a high level and causes, again, that paralysis. It literally, physically limits us, causes us those limiting beliefs. And some of us are so caught in that fear and those anxieties that we can't even leave the house. We can't even function properly. So we need to stop them, confront them, and help us to do better. Reflection and meditating on some things is good, not just for fear and anxiety, but it really helps us for all difficult emotions. From this creating a stable base, then we can work effectively to be less susceptible to the onset of fear and anxiety and other unhealthy emotions. Now, emotions are not good or bad, they are. But when they become negative and affect us negatively, we need to grab a hold of that. So this is a great lesson to help us to deal with them and to become stronger.
So it's often said that depression occurs when we're living in the past. And fear or anxiety occurs when we try too hard to live in and predict the future. So this means that living in the now becomes a very important
Mm,
task. An impossible task sometimes, which is necessary if we are to truly let go of fear and release ourselves from its grip for good. Through various practices like meditation, mindfulness, and creative pursuits, you'll find a noticeable difference in the capacity you possess to stay present.
mm,
Making this as a prior is a making this a priority as you move forward in your life has also proven to be extremely useful in fighting symptoms of other mental and physical illnesses as well. Stay fully present.
mm. Fully present, live in the now. You do a great job of reminding us to do that. And it's not always easy for us,
It's not
but
always easy
you've
for
done a great
me.
job of saying, I need to make sure I'm fully present. I
Yeah.
live in the now. But that's a great lesson, a great reminder. Another one I mentioned earlier, but I think is so true, is gratitude.
Mm-hmm.
Have a grateful attitude. We oftentimes say, be grateful or have a grateful heart. But again, it's that mindset. Am I going to be grateful or am I going to be disgruntled? Am I going to be grumpy or am I going to be grateful? And gratitude literally helps us with the stress, changes our perspective, and changes the way we view so much of our life. And, when you are grateful, science says the areas of the brain which activate during a practice of gratitude are the same places that are associated with the release of dopamine, the pleasure and happiness center of the brain. Isn't that interesting? Wow. Now, as people of faith, I'm just blown away as how God designed us, how he hardwired us and knit us, put us together. It's just amazing to me to see that if we're grateful, it's going to be at the same place in our brain of the happiness center, of the contentment place. Again, this is a way, as Geraldine talked about, living in the now or fully present, drawing awareness of our gratitude and having that gratitude brings us back into the present. It's another way to help us to be thinking now, to live fully present and here and now. Gratitude has the capacity to bring an anxious, fearful person from a bout of uncontrolled anxiety back into the present moment and towards contentment. And there is a big difference. We've talked about that between happiness and joy or contentment. And may not be complacent, but I need to live in contentment. And it
Mm-hmm.
really helps me. But act of gratitude, thoughts and writing down grateful reminders of what we are thankful for literally has that much power. It's amazing. How do we do that? How do we continue to make sure that we're living in the now? Well, gratitude is one of those. We've done the our gratitude challenge
Mm-hmm.
for like 30 days, and we've offered that for others just to challenge you to do that. Others have done the same thing, but we would encourage you just even one thing a day to be grateful for. But in that moment of reflection, in that moment of pause or quietness, list one, two, or three things that you're grateful for that day, and then do it for 30 days and get in that habit. It will really strengthen you, it will help you. Gratitude is a great way, a powerful tool to help us overcome our anxiety and our fear.
Mm. Now, there's a state of consciousness known as flow state, which is characterized by periods of intense focus and undistracted concentration on one specific task. Now, studies have shown that those who spend more time in flow experience lower their levels of anxiety and fear. And so it can be a very effective way to manage this. Many artists describe their most profound artistic insights as stemming from a state of flow. And it's also known to be a period of low emotional fluctuations,
Mm.
where the areas of their brain associated with learning, happiness, and positivity are active. So, what's the conclusion of flow state? In order to experience what it's like to let go of fear and reduce anxiety, we need to spend more time in flow. But what does that mean? So, flow looks different for everyone. For some, it can be more obvious creative pursuits like writing, journaling, singing, drawing, painting, those kinds of things. But these are definitely not the only ways. Absorbing activities such as gardening or walking, running, reading, cooking, cleaning, and even just being wholly absorbed in your work for a period of time are all ways to spend time in flow.
Mhm.
The trick is to find which one of those is for you.
And you talk about that. I've heard it with artists, with musicians, and with athletes of being in the zone.
Mm,
And like everything slows down, but everything's coming. But I think that's really that flow state of being in that zone and what helps you to get there so you're sure at your best
that's
and
good.
helping.
Yeah.
So get in the zone and stay there, the flow state. Fear and anxiety oftentimes is heightened, increased, and becomes debilitating when we try to control the whole environment. When we
Mm,
begin to try to control and determine what's going to happen. Now, we can't control the circumstance. We can only control what we can control. So, how do we control us? Well, that's part of the idea of trust, learning to trust ourselves and learning to trust that we will get through the situation. But when we want to try to control everything around us, that's when we lose control. And that's when the anxiety and the fear oftentimes
mm,
picks up. So we, our brains tend to go to the worst case scenarios. Our brains tend to, if I can't control this is what's going to happen. We don't even know that, but we begin to think that way. Again, mindset, brain, thinking. How do we control that? A little bit of self-trust,
mm.
beginning to help ourselves believe in ourselves and begin to say, not like I'm all that, not this belief like I don't need anybody, but the belief in ourselves that we can get through this. And we trust, for us, people of faith, we trust God will help us to get through that situation. We trust that we can begin to believe that. But if we don't trust ourselves, we're really saying we don't believe how God made us. And it's learning to trust and help ourselves so that we can overcome the fear and anxiety. So, a question: in what areas of your life do you feel you lack trust? And do you trust yourself enough to believe in you that you, and for us, people of faith, and with God's help, we will get through that? We will become more effective and we can literally work through that. Now, we're talking a lot about this idea, and I just want to mention it. These are helpful, but there are times when we need medical professional help too.
Yes.
And some things are so debilitating. So we're not trying to ignore that, saying this is a self-help talk that you just do these things and you won't have to ever face anxiety or fear. We all do. We're talking about what most of us deal with, not those deeper levels of depression, anxiety, and fear. And so we would encourage you, if you need professional help, to definitely get that. But we just want to talk through some things that most of us deal with in everyday life.
And some tools
Yes.
to handle them.
Yes, we just didn't want to. I wanted to make sure that it wasn't like, well, they're saying just here's these self-help ways. No,
Right.
not at
No,
all.
no. So self-trust is only established through having a real and honest connection to your emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Honoring emotions when they arise for precisely what, how, and as they are can be a difficult job to do. Release a need for others' opinions and approval. Many of us seek approval from peers or family and partners simply for the rush of dopamine it provides.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we stream on Instagram so often. We want all those likes on our posts. Identifying this kind of pattern can be hard to admit and face, but will ultimately strengthen your resolve in the long term. As we honor our feelings, being it crying when we're sad or expressing gratitude when we're grateful, or allowing an emotion of admiration to surface about someone we love, we create a safe space for that emotion to exist. Reducing the resistance surrounding it creates a nurturing space for that emotion. Just as we cultivate a safe space to nurture a child, our feelings must be acknowledged, supported, and given an opportunity to grow. By doing this, we can begin to allow the problematic emotions and begin the journey towards moving past them. In terms of fear, often just acknowledging the presence of fear is enough to lessen its intensity.
We've talked a little bit about reflection and meditation, but just to come back and kind of reiterate that this idea, as you see on the screen, the power of silence, sitting in silence with our anxiety and fear may be some of the most emotionally and mentally healthy benefits that we can do.
Mm.
It's not to ignore it or block it out, not like we're just going to sit there or allow it to consume us, but we're grabbing a hold of this and processing those feelings, that emotion that we may be going through. So again, it isn't an opportunity or a time to block it out or ignore it. Not at all. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Stillness forces us to deal with fears and start from a place of stable awareness to change them. That idea of meditation reflection is an excellent tool, just like mindfulness, breath awareness that we talked about, or even just taking time to be by yourself in nature. Where are those that you're best at being you, and that you can begin to sit or stand or walk kind of in that silence so that you can be healthy?
For many people, that's really hard work to have that silent time.
Yeah, it was for me for years. You know, I had to be doing something or noise had to happen. And yeah, exactly right. For many of us, but especially for me, I know that idea of silence was limiting, constricting, and I had to learn the power and effectiveness of it. And
the
it really helped
discipline.
me, the discipline of it.
Yeah.
But yes, some of the hardest work I ever have to do.
Yeah. The practice of mindfulness involves remaining present and mindful in the moment, no matter what the situation around us is. This is easier said than done, especially if we're used to letting the monkey mind take over and lead the way, instead of sitting with emotions like fear and anxiety. You will find, however, that by merely returning yourself to the moment and ensuring you remain present instead of drifting into imaginary thoughts and what ifs, which I find often happen to me in the darkness of the night, laying in bed, you will begin to see your fears in a different light. So here are some following steps to help you capture that in that moment. Notice the way your body might react physically to external triggers. Figuring out your triggers in this way is crucial to gaining the freedom from fear and anxiety that we all seek. Notice the small things around you, beauty in nature, sounds in the distance, or basic bodily sensations we usually take for granted. This is mindfulness. This is becoming present. By doing these things, we become able to turn our fears into beneficial surges of energy, which can then be used to our advantage. Now, stop indulging your fear. It's funny how we tend to indulge in the things that least serve us.
By the way, when we say stop indulging in your fear, we're speaking to ourselves as well. Stop indulging in our fear. I just think that again, I'm like, yeah, I'm so good at telling, but this is a great lesson to remind me as well.
Sure. When it comes to fears, letting the imagination run away with us and staying in a negative cycle of fear indulging habits is the main issue we find ourselves stuck in quite often. When you observe an emotion, fear, or sensation, it's up to you how you are going to deal with it. Indulging in this sensation will strengthen it, allowing it more time and energy when you know it's damaging is probably the worst thing you can do, right? The hardest part of all this is that the only way through is to be strong and not let the thought take charge. Take note when you start feeling fear or anxiety. Don't ignore it, but choose another outlet for it to be expressed and let go of the fear.
Stop waiting for the right time. This usually isn't a problem for me, but when it comes to fear, it's oftentimes, when do I send that? When do I, that email, or when do I have that conversation? When I'm struggling with anxiety, I begin to make excuses for finding the right time. And some people are more inclined that way. I tend to make decisions pretty quick and move forward, and even if it's not the right one, it gets us to the next one, and we make that. But here, it's oftentimes, for many of us, we always look for the right time. We have to get better before we do something. No, we are learning. We have to start, and then we have to get good or get better, keep practicing, keep working on it. When it comes to anxiety and fear, the anxiety and fear causes us to say, this isn't the right time. I'm not going to deal with it. And then it paralyzes. It causes us those limiting beliefs, those thoughts that are not proper or right. And so we're encouraging you, really, we should say, now is the right time. Because if we start now, we can begin to take a hold of those thoughts and begin to process that in an effective, healthy way. In short, waiting for the right time means that fear wins. And that's what we don't want to do, because when fear wins, it doesn't help us. It only debilitates or hurts us and causes us a setback. Now, we don't want to ignore fear, but we want to process the healthy, unhealthy fear and work through that. How do we work through it? Well, it starts with doing it now, because if we wait for the right time, we never will get to the right time.
Now, many modern holistic medicinal approaches, like functional medicine, will advocate the importance of assessing the root causes of illness. This is because there is simply no point in treating the symptoms of any illness, be they mental or physical, with drugs or other prescribed methods without addressing the cause. By treating symptoms, you reduce only symptoms. In discovering the root causes, you can easily get to the bottom of these root causes and remove them for good, or at the very least, help yourself or a loved one become aware of what's truly underlying the symptoms. See the difference? The same goes for fear. You can't possibly hope to remove your fears for good without doing a little bit of inner work and seeking to acknowledge what may be the reason or origin of beliefs behind it all.
Language of emotions and emotional intelligence. Many of us may be familiar with the whole EQ, the emotional intelligence, and learning that. But let me say it this way, because I don't think many of us know how to express those emotions. And the language is so key in how we express that. Emotional intelligence and the language of emotions refer to becoming skillful and aware in the way that we experience and express emotions on a regular basis. I like that definition. How do we experience and express emotions in a healthy way on a regular basis? How often have we used or heard phrases like, I'm just stressed out. I'm really just tired. I'm just can't handle another thing. When we use those to cover up the fear and anxiety rather than to be truthful about it, we use those as excuses rather than reasons. And it just talks, I just love this idea of language of emotions, learning to express it as we experience it in a healthy way. Be aware of the emotional intelligence and get better at that in identifying that within ourselves.
Letting go truly is the only way to access contentment and satisfaction in life. Whether it's fear, anger, love, hate, any example of intense emotion can be hugely impacted by cultivating the ability to let go. Letting go doesn't mean ignoring your difficult emotions. Letting go involves an intricate process of looking, acknowledging, accepting, and moving through your difficulty to truly process it and assimilate any important life lessons that you will undoubtedly learn from it. When it comes to fear, the processes might differ slightly from those involved in letting go of, say, unrequited love or even grief.
Mm-hmm.
And each fear within this sphere will vary too. Sometimes it can seem like the most reckless thing to do, but ultimately, letting go helps us to cultivate a sense of inner strength in ourselves and trust in the world. And mostly for us as people of faith, trusting God, which then allows for greatness to manifest outwards. I'm no longer stuck with the in. I can give out to others. Are you ready to let go?
Well, that's it for us today. We've given a lot of tools and tips, I feel like, and some wonderful ones that we've tried to use and learn from. Others that we have been reminded of, at least for me, that, hey, how well have I used those recently in fighting some of the anxiety and fear? What do I need to do? But really, we're just saying this is the beginning. This is the beginning of the journey for many of us. We're processing this. We're learning how to deal with this, and the tips and the tools that we've shared today really are, when it comes to bottom line, are we ready to let go?
Mm.
And are ready to deal with them effectively and powerfully, with gratitude, with reflection, with breathing, with getting maybe out into nature or doing an activity, all of those kinds of things that we mentioned. But we know this, whether you've processed really well or you've gone back and this has been a great reminder for you to step into it, whether this is some of the first hearing and understanding that you're really putting into practice on letting go of fear and overcoming anxiety, we just want to encourage you that these tools and tips can help us to be better, no matter what stage or level we are. And the other thing is, we know that everyone is capable of doing this, of getting better, of overcoming, of helping as we let go, as we grab a hold of, as we think through, as we process some of those tools and tips that we've talked about today. Every one of us is capable of overcoming and becoming more effective in dealing with and overcoming fear and anxiety. Trust yourself. Trust that fear will come and go and always be lurking on the horizon. It is a persistent and not necessarily always a welcomed friend, but it is there. But we all have the potential to continue to overcome, to be more effective. Know that you do not have to let fear win.
Yeah.
You do not have to buy into, I cannot overcome this. Let's buy into the idea that we can let go and that we can win, that we can overcome the unhealthy habits that fear and anxiety cause us and come to healthy ways to monitor, to grow, and to be our very best. Thanks so much for taking the time to be here. We really thank you for spending some moments with us, and we trust that this has added value to you. If we can help you in any way, we'd love to serve you. You have ways of reaching out to us. Many of you have already connected, you've registered, so you have email, you have access, but reach out to us. We would love to walk through any of this journey with you if we can help you. Thanks so much. Take care.